The rain was falling cold and hard in the alien marketplace. The ground was wet and muddy, and the air smelled of metal, and smoke stalls were crowded with bright lights, selling strange food, weapons, and machines. But in one corner, near a broken wall, sat a small alien girl, her clothes torn, her feet bare, her thin arms wrapped around her knees, trying to keep warm. Her eyes stared at the ground as if she could disappear if no one looked at her. The auctioneer's voice was loud as he called out the next item for sale. People gathered, throwing bids for strong workers, rare pets, or shiny objects. But when the auctioneer pointed to the girl, no one spoke. She had no strength, no beauty, no value to the crowd. Her skin was pale from hunger, her hair dirty from weeks without care. She looked like she could not even stand without falling. Some laughed, others turned away. She was the kind of life no one wanted to buy. She had been here for days, maybe weeks. She lost track of time. Her mind was tired, her heart even more tired. Each time she hoped someone would take her away, but each time the result was the same: rejection. She was nothing but a broken thing. Now the auctioneer sighed and shook his head, lowering his price. Still no one moved. Then, among the crowd, a human man stood, watching him, different from the others. His clothes simple, his eyes calm, not cold like the rest. He was taller than most here, his hair dark, his face lined like someone who had seen too much and learned to live with it. He stepped forward slowly. The people near him moved aside, whispering, because humans were rare in this market, rare and strange. The girl lifted her eyes just enough to see him, her heart ready for another cruel face. But what she saw confused her. There was no greed there, no disgust, only something softer, something warmer. Auctioneer looked hopeful. Finally, maybe someone would take her. But the human did not ask for her price. He did not start a bid. He just knelt down in front of her, his knees in the mud, his voice low, so only she could hear. He asked her name. She said nothing, afraid to speak, afraid her voice would be used against her. He smiled gently and told her it was all right. He told her she was safe for now. She almost laughed at the lie, because no one had ever told her that, and meant it. The auctioneer grew impatient, telling the human to pay or move, but the human stayed there, his eyes never leaving hers. He said something that made her chest feel strange. He said, family. She blinked, not understanding. He said again, you are family now. She wanted to ask what that meant, but her throat was tight, her voice locked inside. Her mind raced. Why would a stranger say that? Why would a human say that? Before she could think more, the human stood and gave the auctioneer something from his coat. Not coins, not credits, but a small metal badge with strange symbols. The auctioneer's face changed, fear and respect mixing in his eyes. He handed the girl over without another word. The human reached out his hand to her, waiting patiently. She hesitated, then slowly placed her small, shaking hand into his. His grip was warm, strong, not crushing, not pulling, just holding. They walked out of the marketplace together, the lights fading behind them, the cold air hitting her face. She looked up at him, but he kept his eyes forward like he had a destination. She did not know where they were going. Maybe to another market, maybe to a prison, maybe to some place worse. She thought about running, but her hand still in his felt too steady to let go. They passed through dark alleys where shadows moved and voices whispered. She kept close to him, afraid of the shapes around them. He never let go of her hand. Once, when a group of rough-looking aliens blocked their way, he stared at them without fear, until they stepped aside, as if they saw something in him they did not want to fight after. A long walk, they reached a small building with a single light above the door. He opened it and led her inside. The smell of warm bread and clean air hit her senses. It was the first time in years she smelled something that felt like home. He guided her to a chair and brought her a bowl of soup. She stared at it, unsure if it was truly for her. He nodded and sat across from her, waiting. She took the first sip slowly, the warmth spreading through her chest like a forgotten memory. She kept eating, afraid it would vanish. When she was done, she looked at him again, still not sure who he was. or why he had taken her, but something inside her wanted to believe, maybe for the first time in a long time, that he was different, that he meant the word. He had said family, she whispered it under her breath, not sure if he heard, but his small smile told her he did. Outside the rain kept falling, but for the first time in years she did not feel completely lost. The sound of rain was gone when she opened her eyes, and for a moment she did not know where she was. The ceiling above her was smooth and pale with a faint glow from a small lamp on the wall. The bed under her was soft, too soft for someone who had slept on cold stone for so long. She sat up quickly, her heart beating fast, wondering if it was some kind of trick her bare feet touched a rug that felt warm against her skin. She looked around the small room. There was a table with folded clothes, a window with curtains, and a closed door. Her mind told her to be ready to run if anyone came in. The door opened slowly, and a human stepped inside carrying a tray. The smell of fresh bread and something warm reached her before he spoke. He placed the tray on the table and told her in a calm voice that it was time to eat. She did not move, afraid that if she touched it, he would take it. A way he seemed to understand, because he stepped back and sat on a chair across the room, giving her space, his eyes watching but not pressing. She picked up the bread with careful fingers. It was soft and warm. She took a small bite and waited for the taste of bitterness or the burn of hidden spice meant to punish her, but it never came. It was simple food, gentle food. Her hands shook as she ate, and he did not say a word until she was done. Then he told her his name was Daniel. She did not answer, but he only nodded as if it was fine. When she asked why he had taken her from the market, his answer was quiet. He said no one should be left like that. She wanted to believe him, but the memory of all the cruel faces she had seen told her not to trust too easily. She asked him what he planned to do with her, and he said nothing that would hurt her, nothing that would break her. And she felt a strange heat in her chest, a mix of fear and something she could not name. That night, as she lay in the bed, she heard sounds outside the building, faint but sharp like metal tapping against metal. Then a shadow passed across the window. She sat up, holding the blanket close to her. The sound came again, this time from the back of the building. She thought about calling Daniel, but her voice caught in her throat. The door to her room was slightly open, and she saw him standing in the hallway. His head tilted like he too had heard something. He moved to the front door slowly and unlocked it. Stepping outside into the night, she could hear the rain dripping from the roof and the faint hum of street lamps, but also something else. Footsteps moving away. She crept to the doorway and peeked out. Daniel stood in the light of the doorway looking into the darkness. Then he closed the door and locked it again, his eyes thoughtful, but he said nothing to her, just told her to go back to sleep. She tried, but the thought of someone watching the house kept her awake. The next morning, Daniel asked if she wanted to see the town. She almost said no, afraid of being taken back to the market, but something in his voice told her it was safe, so she agreed. They walked down narrow streets filled with shops and small houses. People stared at them because a human and an alien girl together was not a common sight. Some eyes were curious, some suspicious. She stayed close to him as they passed a row of vendors selling fruit and warm drinks. They stopped at a small stall where Daniel bought her a sweet pastry. She held it carefully, unsure if she should eat in front of others, but he smiled and nodded, so she took a bite. It was soft and filled with sweet cream. The taste made her close her eyes for a moment, forgetting the stares around her. When she opened them, she noticed a man standing across the street, watching them, his coat dark, his eyes narrow. The sight made her skin prickle. She whispered to Daniel. But when he looked, the man was gone. They returned to the house as the sun began to set. Daniel seemed calm, but she could feel the tension in the air, like he knew something she did not. After dinner, he told her quietly that she was free to stay as long as she wished, and that no one would take her again. He promised her this, and the way he said it made her believe it for just a second. That night, she slept deeper than before. But dreams came, dreams of cold chains and the sound of the auctioneer's voice calling for bids that never came. She woke to the sound of footsteps. Again, this time closer. This time right outside her window, she sat up frozen. The sound moved slowly along the wall, then stopped. Her breath caught. She waited for it to start again, but it did not. When morning came, she told Daniel, and he frowned, saying he would take care of it. He did not explain how, but his voice had the same steady weight it always had. She wondered if he was used to danger. If he had faced worse before, she wanted to ask, but something in his eyes told her the answer might be too heavy to carry. She still did not know why he had chosen her out of all the lives in that market, but a small part of her was starting to think it was not by chance, and that thought both scared her and kept her warm inside. The night air was heavy with silence when Daniel moved through the small kitchen. His footsteps, soft but steady. The girl sat at the table, her fingers curled around a cup of warm tea, her eyes drifting toward the window every few seconds. She had heard the sound again, the faint crunch of boots on wet ground outside. Daniel noticed her glance and asked in a calm voice if she had seen anything. She shook her head, but her eyes told the truth. She was afraid. Daniel walked to the door and opened it slowly, the cool wind carrying the scent of rain and something else, a faint trace of engine oil. He stepped outside, scanning the dark alley behind the house. The lights from the street barely touched the edges of the shadows, but he could see a shape move then vanish. He stayed there for a long moment, listening until the only sound left was the quiet drip of water from the roof. When he came back inside, he told her it was nothing to worry about, but his jaw was tight and his eyes sharper. Then before the next morning, the market square was busy with voices and footsteps. Daniel needed to buy supplies, and he asked her to come along. She hesitated, but followed, keeping close to his side. The streets were lined with traders selling tools, clothes, and strange alien fruits, but she could not shake the feeling of being watched every time she turned her head. She caught a glimpse of a figure slipping away behind the crowd. They stopped at a stall selling dried food and water filters. The merchant greeted Daniel warmly, but his eyes kept flicking toward the girl. She lowered her gaze, feeling the weight of too many stares. Daniel paid and led her away, but not before she saw him glance toward an alley where a man in a dark coat was standing perfectly still. By the time they returned to the house, the air felt tense. Daniel closed the door and locked it, then told her to sit down. He explained that sometimes people from her past might try to find her, especially if they thought she was worth something in the wrong kind of trade. She asked if that meant the market owners. He nodded slowly but did not give details. Instead, he told her that as long as she stayed with him, she would be safe. She wanted to believe him, but the shadow in his eyes told her it would not be so simple. That night, the sound came again, louder than before, glass shattering in the front room. She froze as Daniel moved instantly, pulling a small device from his coat that glowed faintly. He stepped toward the noise without hesitation. She followed, despite her fear, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor in the dim light. She saw the front window broken and two figures stepping inside, their faces hidden by masks. One of them spoke in a low, harsh voice, demanding Daniel hand over the girl. Daniel stood between them and her, his voice firm, telling them to leave. They laughed and took a step closer. One reached for a weapon. Daniel's hand moved faster than she expected, pressing a button. On the device, a bright pulse of light filled the room, forcing the intruders to stumble back, clutching their eyes. He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the back door. They ran into the alley, the rain cold against their skin behind them. The shouts of the masked men echoed through the night. They turned corner after corner until the streets grew quiet, finally stopping near an old storage yard. Daniel pressed his back against the wall, listening for any sound, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths. She asked why he risked himself for her when he could have just let them take her. His answer came without pause: because you are mine now, and I protect my family. The words made her feel a strange ache in her chest, one she did not know how to name. She wanted to ask what family meant to him, but he was already scanning the street, ready to move again. They stayed in the shadows until dawn, when the streets began to fill with workers. Daniel led her back to the house carefully. Watching every corner before they entered the broken glass still on the floor told her that this was no dream she helped him clean in silence. Her mind turning over his words again and again, family. It was a word that felt heavy and light at the same time. Later that day, she stood by the window staring out at the street. The rain had stopped and the sky was pale. She saw no sign of the masked men, but the memory of their voices still clung to her. Daniel was in the next room, repairing the broken frame, his hands steady and precise. She realized that whatever danger was coming, he had already decided to face it for Heron. The quiet of the afternoon, she whispered the word family under her breath, testing the way it felt to say it out loud. For the first time, he looked up from his work and gave her the smallest smile, as if he had heard and understood without her needing to explain anything. Morning sun crept slowly through the small cracks in the curtains, filling the room. With a gentle golden light, she lay still on the bed, listening to the quiet sounds of Daniel moving around in the other room. His footsteps steadied the clink of metal tools as he fixed something on the table. She had not woken up this way in years. Without fear, without cold, without the weight of chains, she turned her head and saw the folded clothes he had given her, the fabric soft and clean, the colors plain but warm. When she stepped into the kitchen, Daniel looked up from his work and gave a small nod toward the chair she sat down, and he pushed a plate of food toward her. Simple bread and fruit, but fresh and filling. She ate, slowly watching him as he worked on repairing a small device. Its wires exposed his fingers, careful, as if every part mattered. She wondered if that was how he saw people, to every part important, even the ones others ignored. After breakfast, Daniel told her they needed to go out into town to get supplies. She felt her stomach tighten, remembering the last time they had gone the stairs, the figure in the dark coat, the feeling of being watched. But Daniel's calm voice eased her nerves. He said she would be safe with him, and though she still doubted, she found herself believing just enough to follow. The town was busier today, filled with alien voices and smells, the air alive with the sound of haggling and laughter. Daniel stopped at a clothing stall, picking out a coat for her, the fabric thick enough to keep her warm. The merchant gave her a curious look but said nothing. Daniel paid without hesitation and helped her put it on. The weight of it felt strange, almost like the weight of Karaz. They walked. She noticed small details she had never cared to see before, the way children ran between stalls laughing, the way shopkeepers called out to customers, the way the air smelled of spices and fresh bread. She began to feel something she could not name, but it was softer than fear and warmer than anger. They passed a stall selling small trinkets carved from wood. Daniel stopped to examine them, and she picked one up, a small bird with wings, spread the texture smooth under her fingers. The merchant smiled and told her it was a symbol of freedom. She placed it back quickly, feeling heat rise in her face, but Daniel bought it and handed it to her, saying it should be hers. She held it tightly as they walked on back at the house she helped. Daniel put away the supplies, her movements awkward at first, unused to doing such things freely. But he guided her without scolding, showing her how to place each item where it belonged. Every small success made her shoulders a little less tense, and she began to feel almost comfortable. That evening, as the sky darkened, Daniel sat at the table working on a datapad while she sat across from him, holding the wooden bird. She wanted to ask about his life, about why he had chosen her, but the words felt too heavy on her tongue. Before she could speak, a sharp knock came at the door at Daniel's head. Lifted, his eyes narrowing, he rose and opened it, just enough to see outside. Tall alien stood there, dressed in the uniform of the local council, his voice firm as he handed Daniel a sealed notice. Daniel read it without showing much expression, then thanked the man and closed the door. He placed the notice on the table and told her there was an arrest warrant for him. Her breath caught. The paper looked official, the kind of thing that could not be ignored. She asked why, and he said quietly that someone had accused him of interfering with property trade. Her mind spun with questions. Was this because of her? Did the men from the market have this power? Daniel told her not to worry, but his voice carried a weight she could not ignore. She felt a cold fear crawl up her spine, the fear that the small, safe place she had found might be slipping away before she could hold it. That night she could not sleep. She sat by the window looking out at the quiet street. Every shadow seemed sharper, every sound louder. She thought about the word family and wondered if it could survive in a world that wanted to tear it apart. She thought about running to keep him safe, but the thought of leaving him felt like tearing out part of herself and the other. Daniel moved quietly, checking the locks on the doors and windows. His silhouette steady against the dim light. When he noticed her watching, he gave her that same small smile. He always did, the one that told her without words that he was not letting go no matter what came next. She turned back to the window, gripping the small wooden bird in her hand. Its wings spread as if ready to fly, and for the first time she thought maybe she was ready to learn how. The sound of sirens broke the quiet of the early morning, their sharp wail cutting through the soft hum of the city. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding. Daniel was already at the window, his eyes fixed on the street below. Red and blue lights flashed against the walls of the building's. Footsteps echoed on the wet pavement, the air heavy with the smell of rain and tension. He turned to her and told her in a low voice that they had to leave. Now she grabbed the small wooden bird from the table, holding it tight as he pulled a worn bag from under the bed. He stuffed it with essentials, moving quickly but carefully, as if every second mattered. Yet every move had to be right. The knock on the door came loud and hard. She froze. Daniel glanced toward the sound, then toward the back of the house. Motioning for her to follow, they slipped through the narrow hallway into the small kitchen, where he unlocked a door leading into an alley. A cold air hit her face as they stepped outside. The sirens still close, but not yet at their door. Daniel led her through the twisting back streets, his steps sure, even though the ground was slick with rain. She stumbled, but he caught her arm, each time keeping her close behind them. The sound of heavy boots splashing in puddles grew louder. Shouts in an alien tongue carried through the air, telling others to block the exits. They turned a corner and found two patrol drones hovering in the narrow passage, their lights scanning the ground. Daniel pressed her against the wall, whispering for her to stay still. The drones passed without noticing, and they moved again. Faster now, weaving through tighter spaces. The city seemed to close in around them, walls rising high on either side, like a maze built to keep them trapped. She could hear her own breathing, quick and uneven. Daniel's hand gripping hers, never loosening. A flash of light ahead made Daniel stop, pulling her back into the shadows. A patrol unit had set up a checkpoint in the next street, blocking their way. He looked around, scanning for another path. His eyes settled on a half-open gate leading into a small workshop. They slipped inside. The smell of oil and metal strong in the air. Old machines stood silent in the dark, their outlines faint under the dim light filtering through the cracked roof. Daniel moved to the back of the workshop, finding another door that opened onto a narrow service road. They stepped out into the chill wind, the sound of the sirens now behind them, but not gone. She wanted to ask where they were going, but he was focused, his eyes always scanning ahead. They crossed an old bridge over a shallow canal, the water below black and slow. She looked down and saw her reflection distorted by the ripples. It made her think of the girl she had been at the market, and how far she had come, yet how close that world still was. They reached an abandoned outpost on the edge of the city, its walls cracked, its windows broken. Daniel led her inside, the dust and silence making the place feel forgotten. He set the bag down and checked the rooms, making sure they were alone. She stood in the center of the main room, looking at the faded markings on the walls, wondering who had once been here and what had driven them away. When he returned, he told her they could rest here for a while. Her legs ached from running, her hands still tight around the wooden bird. She sat on the floor, leaning against the wall. Daniel sat across from her, pulling a folded piece of paper from his pocket. He handed it to her, and she unfolded it slowly. It was a photograph, faded at the edges, showing Daniel standing with a woman and two children, their faces bright with joy. She traced the outlines of the children with her finger, then looked at him. He told her they were his family once before the war, before the raids, before he had lost them. His voice was steady, but his eyes held a shadow. She realized then that she was not the first life he had tried to protect, and that maybe saving her was his way of holding on to what he had lost. She felt a knot form in her throat, unsure what to say, so she simply placed the photograph back in his hand. He gave a small nod, as if that was enough. As night fell, the outpost grew colder. Daniel started a small heater, its soft glow filling the room. She lay on the floor, watching the light flicker against the cracked walls, her mind heavy with thoughts of the men who had come for her, of the council's warrant, of the way Daniel never let go of her hand. No matter the danger, she wondered how long they could keep running, and if there would ever be a place where no one would come looking. In the silence, Daniel's voice came quiet but firm, telling her that no matter where they went, he would keep her safe. That family meant staying together even when the world tried to tear you apart. She closed her eyes, holding on to that promise, letting it be the last thing she heard before sleep pulled her away. The cold wind seeped through the cracks in the old outpost walls as the night stretched on. The girl woke to the faint creak of metal and the distant crunch of footsteps on gravel. Her heart quickened. She pushed herself up from the floor, the small heater still glowing weakly in the corner. Daniel was standing near the window, his shoulders tense, his eyes fixed on the darkness outside. She moved closer, asking in a low voice if someone was there. He nodded without looking away, telling her they had been found. Sound grew clearer. More footsteps, more than to the crunch of heavy boots echoing between the abandoned buildings. Daniel turned to her, his voice steady but firm, telling her to get behind the inner wall and stay low. She hesitated, not wanting to leave him alone, but the sharpness in his eyes left no room for argument. She crouched behind the cracked stone, her hands gripping the wooden bird tightly, her ears straining to catch every sound. A shadow moved past the broken doorway, then another, and another, masked figures stepping into the dim light, their movements cautious but confident. The leader spoke, his voice cold, demanding that Daniel hand over the girl and no one would get hurt. Daniel's reply came without hesitation, telling them they would have to go through him first. The men laughed, a cruel sound that sent a shiver through her spine. The leader signaled and two of them stepped forward, weapons in hand. Daniel moved fast, grabbing a metal bar from the floor and swinging it with precision. The first blow knocked one weapon aside, the second sent the man stumbling back. The fight erupted in the small space. The sound of metal striking metal, the dull thud of boots on the ground, the sharp gasps of effort. Daniel fought with a quiet determination, his movements controlled and deliberate. But there were too many of them. One man managed to land a strike on his side, making him stumble. She felt something inside her snap. She could not just hide while he fought for her. She rose from behind the wall, grabbing a broken piece of wood from the floor. She stepped into the chaos, swinging it with all her strength at the nearest attacker. The man grunted in pain and turned toward her, giving Daniel the opening to push him away. For a moment their eyes met, and Daniel gave the smallest nod of approval before turning back to the fight. Attackers regrouped, their leader shouting orders to move to block the exit, while the others pressed forward. Daniel's breath was coming harder now, but he did not back away. She stayed near him, striking when she could, her fear slowly replaced by a fierce determination to stand with him no matter the outcome. The room echoed with the clash of struggle, the air thick with the smell of sweat and dust. Finally, after what felt like hours, but could only have been minutes, the leader raised his hand, signaling for his men to stop. His eyes narrowed as he looked at them both. Then he spoke, telling Daniel this was not over, and that they would return for what was theirs. With that they backed away, disappearing into the night, leaving only the sound of their footsteps fading into the distance. The silence that followed was heavy. Daniel leaned against the wall, his hand Pressed to his side where the blow had landed, she rushed to him, her hands trembling as she asked if he was hurt. He gave a small smile, saying he had been worse, but she could see the pain in his eyes. She helped him to the heater, guiding him down to sit. He thanked her in a voice softer than she had ever heard, saying that she had done more than he expected. She told him simply that he had called her family, and family stood together as the heater's light flickered across the cracked walls. She thought about the fear that had gripped her at the market, about the hopelessness that had been her only companion for so long, and about how different it felt now. Even with danger still close, she was not running away this time, she was choosing to stay. Daniel leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. She watched him, feeling a quiet resolve settle in her chest. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side. The night outside was still dark, and the wind still cold, but inside the old outpost something had changed. The girl who had once been lost and shamed now stood ready to fight for the place she belonged and for the man who had given it to her. The first light of morning slipped through the cracks in the old outpost walls, casting thin golden lines across the dusty floor. The girl sat quietly beside Daniel, who was still resting, his breathing slow but steady. She had stayed awake most of the night, listening for any sound outside, the memory of the masked men still sharp in her mind. But the silence had held only the faint whistle of the wind and the distant call of early market traders. When Daniel opened his eyes, he gave her that small smile she had come to know, the one that told her everything was all right, even when it was not. She asked if they would need to leave again, and he nodded, saying it would be safe or far from here. She helped him to his feet, gathering the few belongings. They had the wooden bird, the worn bag, the photograph he tucked carefully inside his coat. They left the outpost before the streets grew busy, moving through the back paths Daniel knew so well, each turn taking them farther from the heart of the city. The air grew clearer, the buildings fewer, until they reached the open road that stretched toward the hills. She had never been beyond the city walls before. The sight of the wide horizon made her feel small, but also strangely free. As they walked, she thought about all that had happened since the marketplace. The rain, the first warm meal, the nights of running, the moments where danger felt too close, and yet somehow they were still here together. Daniel spoke little, but his presence was enough. Every step forward felt like a promise that no matter how far they had to go, they would face it as one by midday. They reached a small settlement hidden between the hills, its houses built from stone and wood, smoke curling gently from chimneys. People moved slowly here, their faces calm and unhurried. Daniel spoke with a tall woman near the gate, exchanging quiet words. Before she led them inside to a modest home she said belonged to friends who were away for the season. It was safe here, she told them, safe from the reach of the council and the traders. The house was simple but warm, the scent of fresh bread drifting from the kitchen. The girl moved through each room, touching the smooth wooden tables, the soft blankets folded neatly on beds. It felt like a place where life could be lived without fear. Daniel sat near the window, watching the road as if out of habit, his eyes scanning for anything unusual, but for the first time in days his shoulders seemed to resign. The afternoon they visited the small marketplace of the settlement, nothing like the chaos of the city here. Vendors smiled and greeted them. Without suspicion, Daniel bought fresh fruit and a small bundle of fabric. He handed the fabric to her, saying she could make something of her own. She held it close, the soft weave between her fingers, feeling like more than just cloth. It was a choice, a future. That evening the settlement leader visited, a broad-shouldered man with kind eyes. He asked Daniel about their journey and listened without interruption. When Daniel finished, the leader turned to her and asked her name. She hesitated. The old name, the one the traders had used, felt like a chain she did not want to carry. Daniel's eyes met hers, steady and encouraging. She thought of the word he had given her family, and she spoke a new name, one that was hers alone for the first time. The leader nodded, writing it down in the small book he carried, saying that she was now registered as a resident of the settlement. No one here could take her away without breaking the law. The weight in her chest lifted, replaced by something bright and steady. She looked at Daniel and saw the same quiet pride in his face that she had seen when she had stood beside him in the fight. Night settled over the hills, the stars spilling across the dark sky. She stood outside the house, the cool air brushing her skin. Daniel joined her, standing in silence for a long moment, then telling her in a voice low and certain that whatever path lay ahead, she was no longer alone. She told him she knew and that she was ready for whatever came. Next, inside the house, the small wooden bird sat on the table, its wings spread as if ready to fly tomorrow. They would begin building a life here, planting roots in a place where the past could not reach her anymore. And as she lay down to sleep in a real bed in a real home, she thought of the journey from lost and shamed to found and named, and knew that this was not the end, but the beginning of a life worth living.